Hello and happy gaming, everybody. My name is Dark Sage Walker, and I am here to present to you my next tier list for One Step from Eden's spells. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Hey, Dark Sage, didn't you say you were going to be doing the Hexawan spells next? What exactly is this? That doesn't look like a gun turret. You're right. See, the problem is, in between Glimmer and Hexawan, there's another brand that I completely forgot about. So, this tier list is going to be about Hearth and its spells. So, Hearth does a few things. It does Root, it does Tile Destruction, and it does Flow. Unfortunately, most of that doesn't translate very well into how the game really plays. As a matter of fact, let's just be straight up honest. Hold on, let me get a little bit of strawberry lemonade here. I honestly think that Hearth has some of the worst spells in the game. Not just necessarily in their effect or what they do, but because some of these spells either take way too much setup to be reasonable, or they just flat out put you in harm's way. You're not going to see a lot of things coming up here in like this S or A grade. No, Hearth is pretty much where a lot of the garbage resides. And I don't necessarily blame the team at Thomas Moon Kang for that. I think no matter how good of a job you do with some things, no matter how hard you work at it, there will always be a series of spells that are crap. And we see that in Wizard of Legend, too. I mean, remember Permafrost Bulwark? How much garbage that is? Or, Engulfing Fissure? Not everything gets to be top of the line. And this is very much, not top of the line. But enough of that. Let's get into the usual disclaimer. Everything in a vacuum. But like with Double Lift, that's kind of hard to do. So I'm just going to do the best I can with what I have to work with. That means that some of the spells that have a special flow cast, that's part of the spell, so I'm going to have to talk about that as well, even though it's using a resource you don't always have. It's just something I'm going to have to do. So, are we ready? Hold on. I need a little bit more strawberry lemonade, and let's be fair, if I were an alcohol drinker, this would be whiskey right now, because I hate talking about the Hearth spells. I really don't like many of them. But someone's got to do the dirty deed, so let's get into it. Hold on, I'm missing a resource. There it is. Hold on just a minute. I'm so flustered by the idea that I completely missed a brand that I didn't even have myself altogether ready to go here. So we're gonna go ahead and start with Coldstone. And as soon as I have the right information, here we go. Alright, Coldstone. Alright, now I'm ready to go. Sorry that took me a little while. So, Coldstone is actually probably one of the better Hearth spells. And even at 3 mana cost, that's a little high for my taste. But it fires got a very simple effect. Fires one shot that does 200 damage, and if you're casting it with a flow cast, you also get a Frostbolt out of that. So it's 3 mana. Alright, fair. That's a legit complaint against it. But then it does 200 damage, plus 40 if you're on flow, and if you're on flow, it also leaves 1 frost. Honestly, this is probably one of the better Hearth spells. I'm going to put it up here. It isn't so effective that I'm willing to put it at S grade, but it's definitely better than average, even if only by a little bit with that high mana cost. Earth Prayer. On flow, restore 4 mana and gain 4 flow. Somehow Earth Prayer came before Earth... How did I do that? Alright, well, whatever. Earth Prayer is right here. Most of the spells that are there just to restore mana don't make any sense to me. Now, this does have a use in flow decks. I'm not going to say it's completely useless, but god damn is it close. And it only even restores mana if you have flow, so this is one of those things that only works in a 100% flow-focused deck. Like, you're not taking anything that doesn't have the word flow in it. And, yeah, those decks have their own issues. Alright, well, since everything seems out of order, let's just go ahead and go Earthworm. Launches rocks that break 3 tiles away until you move, so it's another channel spell. And you break the tile behind you. So it's each shot that hit does 10 damage, and it does so pretty quickly. But it does so on a specific tile. It leaves you with a broken tile that you can't move over unless you have wings. And because it hits on a specific enemy tile, first of all, it can't hit 4 tiles away, so it can't hit the back row at all. And then the only time it's ever going to hit anything is if it's sitting completely still. Very few times are you going to be able to make that work. It's not like Infinity Beam where you can be in the back row and firing a beam across everything in front of you. No, it hits a specific tile. The only thing that keeps this from being D grade is that you can upgrade it with things like, with on-hit effects. And even then, I'd still say this pretty much isn't worth taking. Alright, so we've got Earthworm out of the way. What's next? Earth and Armor. Alright, gain 40 shield and crack adjacent tiles, gain 2 flow. So crack isn't the same thing as broken. You can still move over a cracked tile, but after you move over it, then it breaks. Now, this is basically shields up with a crack effect. You also gain 2 flow from it, but the good part about it is that it costs no mana. Like, I'm still not too skippy on it, but I mean, again, it's one of the better. Well, I guess it is one of the better flow spells as well, but it's one of the better Hearth branded spells. Again, the effect is simple and it doesn't immediately come back to haunt you, but cracked tiles can hurt your chances. So that's why I'm not putting it at S grade. I'm not sure if there's anything here that is going to be an S grade, but I might prove myself wrong about that. So let's keep going. Entangle. Root enemies in a large cone for 3 seconds. Alright, so yes, as said, it strikes out in a large cone in front of you. It's costs 1 mana and it does do 20 damage. Now, this isn't great against, like, the gate, but it's pretty good against most other enemies. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, I mean, if it roots for 3 seconds, doesn't that set up for Earthworm? Earthworm. I would say still not really, because most of the time they'll be able to break out of the hold before Earthworm really takes effect. Also remember, that is 3 mana to go with Entangle and then Earthworm, and I don't know. I say Entangle belongs about here. It's good if you really need the root effect. There are cool things you can do with root. Just, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking maybe I can talk myself into moving it up into A, but I don't know. Excavate. Fire a missile from each broken tile at the farthest enemy. So each missile fired this way does 25 damage, but you can't aim at what enemy you hit unless you know it's the farthest one away. If there's only one enemy, of course, it aims at that enemy. Now, I've had, even before I get into my real feelings on this spell, I've had plenty of times where I've had lots of broken tiles, fired an excavate, and just as I'm firing, it's like the game said, oh, what's that? Move 1 tile down? Can do. And the whole thing just completely dissipates because it's all aiming at 1 tile and doesn't necessarily hit anything on the way to that 1 tile. So now let's start actually talking about the spell, now that I've talked about what is going to undoubtedly be the Excavate horror story. The one good thing about Excavate is that you don't have to aim it. But that's also one of the bad things about it, is that you don't have to aim it. Coupled with the idea that you have to break tiles ahead of time to use it, coupled with the idea that, yeah, it does 25 damage per shot, and you can get a lot of shots, but your enemy only has to move one tile to avoid it. Excavate is not worth the trouble. Like, let's say that you're even just playing as Break Loadout Terra. Her main weapon can break tiles, so let's say you break like 8 tiles to prepare for that. So yeah, that's 200 damage for 1 mana. But did you take into account the other 8 mana that you needed to fire her weapon 8 times? And then after all of that, what's going to happen if all those shots miss? That means that you put a total of 9 mana and all of that time and effort into an attack that did absolutely nothing. So I'm sorry, this is probably one of the worst spells in the game. The idea was sound, but my god, I cannot stand that spell. Easily one of the least reliable, most useless spells in the game. I think we're noticing a trend here. Now let's go with Fissure. Crack all tiles in front and push enemies aside. Gain 2 flow. So, I'm not 100% sure, but I think when you use Fissure, it also cracks the tiles on your side. Now, it's good for getting flow, it does do 80 damage, and for 2 mana, the mana cost is fine, but what I really don't like is how it cracks tiles on your side as well. Right? Average is about the best term for that. Flat Earth. Gain 10 shield for each broken tile. Fix all broken tiles. Once again, we have something that relies on there being a lot of broken tiles, which, even when you're just using these spells, doesn't really happen all the time. So, once again, let's look at this mathematically. Let's say you've broken like 5 or 6 tiles to get with Terra's weapon on Break Loadout to get Flat Earth to work. So, even if you've just broken 5 tiles, that now means you spent 5 mana, and then you use Flat Earth, which is 6th mana, you gain 50 shield, and all of those tiles get fixed. Very nice. And it's good that there's something that synergizes with broken tiles, I guess, but and you want to know what else is going to get you 60 shield? Shield Catch. This is another one of those spells that takes way too much effort to be worth it. I even when I do on rare occasion try a flow build, I don't take Flat Earth. And I try to get rid of Excavate as soon as possible. Like, it's just not worth it. There's too much effort involved in it, and well, that's basically it. There's too much time, too much effort, too much mana. It just strictly isn't worth it. Flint Shot. Fire a shot. Reduce damage by 40 for this battle. On flow, don't reduce damage. So if you're not flow casting Flint Shot, then you're losing damage on it. So 2 mana for 200 damage is good, but if you're not flow casting that, then it goes down to 160 damage, and that's before you've ever fired it once. So you don't think that you're getting 1 shot for 200 and then you have to start worrying about getting flow on it to not reduce damage? No, that first shot is a lie. It says 200, what it means is 160. This is another spell that could be good if it weren't for the flow mechanic. Now, what you're supposed to do is, when you're using a flow deck, you have all sorts of cards that you either have or upgrade to use flow, and then you use that as resources to dump into like 1 or 2 cards at the end. This is supposed to be one of those cards that you dump your flow stacks into at the end. So on that note, I say I can understand and respect it, but I'm still only putting it at B. And that's with taking into account the idea that you have some flow stacks. Without flow stacks, this kind of falls into the low B, high C range, but I'm leaving it there because, frankly, the Hearth brand needs all the help it can get. Fracture. Fire a rock. On flow, cast this twice, and then you gain 2 flow. This costs 1 mana for 70 damage. So, if you have flow from another spell that's actually good, then this can actually be somewhat useful. And landing twice means that it has the opportunity to activate other things. Like, this is actually a legit pretty decent spell. I have no major complaints about Fracture, aside from the fact that it needs flow to be anything outside of average. And again, I'm leaving it at A because, again, I feel like it needs all the help it can get. Actually, no, I'm going to put it down to B. Because with flow and 1 mana, you can get 140 damage potentially. But but by saying that you needed flow, that means you needed at least 1 other mana in order to get that. You know, for 1 mana, you can also just get 100 damage with Thunder. Just saying. Yes, this is easier to aim because it hits an entire row instead of just a specific spot, but it's still less damage and requires a little bit more effort if you want to get anything out of it. I don't know, like I said, don't like Hearth spells very much. I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible, but these are kind of like the dump spells. Ion Hamper. Yes, put your clothes in the Ion Hamper. The hell am I talking about? Ion Cannon. Hit the 4 center tiles of the enemy field and crack them. This costs 2 mana, and if they get hit by this, it does 100 damage. Once again, this is fairly simple. I'm okay with this, but once again, I'm not putting it at anything higher than B, because once again, it's 2 mana for something that you can get for 1 mana, first of all. But secondly, its coverage is really weird. Like, it hits the center 4 tiles of the enemy field, but then it doesn't hit anything on the outside. I don't know about you, but anytime I see an enemy stroll into the center part, I cast this spell and then they like immediately dart out. And then they don't even walk over the cracked tiles to begin with. I don't know, maybe this is better in PvP, but I have a hard time getting this spell to work. I admit that having a nice area of effect for 100 damage is nice, which is why it's not at C or D rank, but I can't really justify taking this spell most of the time. Yeah, it's not really getting much better. Mistletoe. Fire missiles at the closest target. Root target for 1 second. So this fires 3 missiles that do 40 damage and root for 1 second. So some of the problems I have with this spell is, once again, because you're not aiming it doesn't necessarily always hit. Like, if your target decides to be real cheeky and do something like list lazily to the left, then your shots just miss. Beyond that, another problem that I have with Mistletoe is that, yeah, it says it roots the target for 1 second. The problem is, even if you hit with all 3 missiles, that's still just 1 second of root. Like, it doesn't add up for whatever reason. Now, I'm open to being wrong about that, but assuming that I am correct, I'm putting it down at C just because it's unreliable. If I'm wrong about that, and the 1 second of root does add up properly, and you get 3 seconds out of it, then I would consider moving it up to a B rank. But as it is, I'm leaving it there. But someone please let me know if my information is incorrect, because as much as I dislike the Hearth spells, I would still rather have correct information out there. Orbital Beam. Fire beams 4 tiles away that break tiles. So it costs 2 mana, does 40 damage, and fires 4 shots. Each shot that hits does indeed break an enemy tile. This spell has potential to be pretty good. If you get a decent upgrade on it, this spell can do some fun work for you. It's a little slow, so you'll sometimes have difficulty hitting those 4 shots. But what you can do is, after you've activated the spell, you can move around and have those beams hit something else. just so long as it's whatever is 4 tiles away. So it can be a little tricky, but you're not necessarily left out if you don't hit with all of your shots against one target. That having been said, you are best off using this against a near stationary foe, and it is still a little slow. I don't know, I think once again we've got a B rank spell here. Prophecy. Hit a random row after 6 seconds, breaks tiles, can hit self. So, before I get into it, let's get the details. 2 mana, the blast does 200 damage, and it hits 1 time. Here's my problem with the Prophecy spell. It takes 6 seconds. So, you fire this off, first of all, you have no control over what row you're hitting. It takes 6 seconds for it to hit, so basically you need to hope that the planets align to even hit with it. And then, assuming that that does happen, you're hitting for 200 damage. And kind of creating a little unintentional quarantine on your own end of the field because you've just broken tiles on your end. This is, of course, unless you have wings. The other problem with Prophecy is that you don't want to stroll over those tiles while they're in the midst of being targeted because you can hit yourself with that. And I'm telling you that there is very few things in this world that swing a fight in one step from Eden, more so than casting Prophecy. It completely misses your enemy, but you hit yourself on the noggin pretty hard. No, this spell is garbage. I can't stand Prophecy. It's one of the worst. Rock Cycle. On flow, return this to your deck. Anchor. So the Anchor is for a very short period of time. That's not a huge deal. Now, this spell did get a change. When the game first came out, this spell actually allowed you to gain flow as well. So if you went into it with flow, you basically just had an infinite heavy machine gun. And if you put gain 10 shield on it, you could just sit there and do that basically forever. Like, it was absolutely broken, it was nonsensical, it was absolutely just busted. After they fixed that, well, it took away an infinite, but I don't know, the spell seems a lot more fair. I think it belongs average. Once again, it's 1 mana for 60 damage isn't bad. The flow effect is nice, and that's obviously something you want to dump your flow stacks into. Without flow, not so great. Dare I say you're just throwing a rock. Rock Tomb. Fire missiles at random enemies. They gain 40 shield. On flow, pierce shield. Gain 2 flow. Alright, so it fires 4 shots that do 100 damage and it costs 4 mana. Okay, I don't care how good 400 damage sounds. First of all, it's for 4 mana. Second of all, the enemies are gaining shield from it. And third of all, even if you have flow, yeah, okay, so that pierces shield. That means it's not doing 60 damage, it's doing 100 damage per missile. But what that ultimately means is that the enemies are then left with 40 shield afterwards. Which means that you could potentially be giving the enemy 160 shield, and yeah, it's 400 damage, but then afterwards you have to whittle down that shield if you didn't kill the enemy directly. It's a lot like the Iron Will spell. So what I will say is that, yeah, it's good for finishing off an enemy, assuming you hit, because it aims for you. But let's assume for a moment that you didn't hit. Okay, you just wasted 4 mana. Let's assume that you do hit. You did a bunch of damage, but now the enemy has 160 extra shield. Absolutely terrible in boss fights, and even in regular battles against enemies with greater than usual health. Again, not worth it. Like, the only reason it isn't getting stuck down in the damn near unusable category is because you can at least use it to finish off a weakened enemy. That's all it has going for it. And you can't even choose which enemy it is because it hits randomly. I will probably be talking a lot of crap about Hexawan spells when I get to them, make no mistake. But most of those spells are still usable. God, I hate Hearth. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to be biased, but the more I try, the more I keep going, boy, it's a good thing I'm not an alcoholic, because I would be drinking myself stupid right now. I'm gonna hate this brand. Alright, Sword Row, which, once again, somehow is coming after Swords of Light, but anyway. Swords fall in front and root for 3 seconds. It costs 2 mana. It only deals 10 damage, but it hits an entire row, and whatever it hits does get rooted, so you can follow that up with like a PK Fire or Wall of Fire, potentially. Like, there's things that you can follow that up with, even just a Thunder spell. This is probably one of the most usable spells in Hearth, especially since after the swords fall, they linger there for a little bit. And if one of your enemies just happens to walk onto a tile that has a sword on it, like it doesn't hit them directly, but they walk onto it, it still takes effect. So, not bad. And I would say you kind of have the same thing going for Swords of Light. Rain down swords that root for 3 seconds. Now, again, it's not aimed, it's random. Now, to me, that makes it worse than Sword Row, because you can't really aim where it hits. I've used this spell in runs and had it have no effect literally every time I've cast it for an entire run. That having been said, I can see some use for it, which is why I'm not putting it in C or D rank, but if you were to tell me I had a choice between that and Entangle, I would take Entangle every time. As a matter of fact, because I just said that, boom. Fuck you, Swords of Light. Tile Fire. Break and throw tiles above and below. Gain 2 flow. So it fires 2 shots in kind of the same shot pattern as Power Saws, except for they don't come back. It breaks those tiles and you gain 2 flow. Now, the damage is good. 120 damage isn't bad, but it's for 2 mana and you're left with broken tiles, and you can't hit the same enemy twice unless it's the gate. Now, I've had just those 2 broken tiles from Tile Fire completely screw my dodging before and force me to get hit by attacks that I could otherwise dodge because of those broken tiles. So, the damage is good. The odd aim isn't. The broken tiles are bad. I gotta put it down there. Now, as far as flow cards are concerned, I mean, it doesn't even have a flow cast effect, so never mind. I'm just leaving it there. The hell with it. Tremor. Fire a rock and crack adjacent tiles. And when they say adjacent, they don't necessarily just... Well, no, it is up, down, left, right. They're not counting the diagonal, so never mind. On flow, you fix those adjacent tiles. So, for 1 mana, you can do 140 damage and crack the tiles around you, or you can do 140 damage and not crack the tiles around you with some extra effort. And as far as this is concerned, that's pretty much a B. Alright, really got nothing. Waterfall. So, quick note about Waterfall. This actually used to be a Kinesis branded spell, but they changed it because flow is something that works out way better in Hearth, and Waterfall uses flow as such. Fire a shot 4 tiles away for every flow stack. Gain 1 flow on hit. So it does 40 damage just for X. X being however many flow stacks you have. This is probably the best spell to be unloading your flow stacks into, and even then you have to do it in such a way that you know the enemy isn't going to be moving for a bit just to make sure they get hit by all that. But it is another spell that had infinite potential, which I don't know if it still does, but judging by the wording of it, so long as you're hitting with it, it's more or less infinite. So, get that root handy. And speaking of root, we've got one last spell. Wreath. Root enemies for 3 seconds in a circle 4 tiles away. It costs 1, it does no damage, and it just creates a ring around the tile 4 tiles away that will root enemies. So it does exactly what it says it does. So if you need root and you're pretty much going with either this, Entangle, or Sword Row, I'm going to put it here because unlike these other 2 spells, it doesn't do any additional damage, it just does the root effect, and that's it. And speaking of that's it, that's all of the Hearth spells. I don't like most of them. I mean, the 4 that I put at A rank are there mostly just because their effect dictates that that's probably where they belong. They're the most usable spells, and even then, there are generally better examples of most of them. Shields Up is better than Earthen Armor. Cold Stone does a lot of damage, but for 3 mana, you can also cast Shine and get so much more out of it. This is about the best root spell, not gonna lie. But is it better than Entangle? Debatable. Now that I think about it, Entangle might actually be better than Sword Row, but regardless. And then this is pretty much your combo ender for a flow deck. And even then, without flow, it's not even that good. So just to give this one a separate rank, without flow, I put it down here. I'm leaving it up here because once again, Hearth needs all the help it can get. But take that with a grain of salt because on the whole, Hearth is the Hearth focus is pretty much the worst focus in the game. These spells do nothing for him, just about nothing for you. And in the case of some of them, it's worse than nothing. It's put in all this extra work, and in the end, you might get rewarded for it. Not you will, you might. There's just no sense in using most of these spells. And if you can't tell by the disappointment in my voice, I am a little bit upset that I had to talk about this instead of talking about interesting strategies for Hexawan spells and things that I would like to see change, because there are Hexawan spells that I do like. There's builds using Hexawan spells that I like. And there's interesting things that I wanted to talk about, but I had to get through this first. So I'm glad I got it done. It is definitely there for sake of completion, but believe me when I say Hearth is the worst spell branding. Just bar none. I hate most of the Hearth spells. I don't know how many people agree with me on that, but whatever your opinion might be, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think about most of the Hearth brand spells. Maybe there's uses that I've missed for some of them. Maybe one of you knows something about the Hearth spells that I don't. Whatever the case may be, comment below, let me know, and I will be back with more stuff in the near future. My name is Dark Sage Walker, and I will be seeing you.